So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Lars Steffen. I'm Director International DECO, and I welcome you to the topDNS Best Practice webinar in collaboration with the DNS Abuse Institute. There are still people joining the room, so please stay on the line. So it's now 2 minutes past the hour, so I think we are ready to go. So again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the topDNS Best Practice webinar, DNS Compass Dashboards, benchmarking the prevalence and persistence of malware and phishing for registries and registrars in collaboration with the DNS Abuse Institute. My name is Lars Steffen. I'm Director International at the ECO Association, and our speaker today is Rowena Schoo. She's Director of Programs and Policy at the DNS Abuse Institute. So welcome, Rowena. And first of all, I'd like to introduce you to the housekeeping rules for today's webinar. So this webinar, of course, is being recorded. The recording will be available after the webinar. You are muted throughout the webinar. You can submit questions via the questions pod on the right-hand side of your dashboard of the GoToWebinar tool. You can also submit your questions verbally by using the raising your hand functionality. We will unmute you, and please state your name and your affiliation before you ask your question. And after the webinar, you will receive a survey. This is always a great opportunity to provide feedback if the webinar and the content has been useful and how we can improve future webinars. If you would like to learn more about the topDNS initiative, please follow the link that I will put into the chat. So this is the fifth in a series of webinars. So the first 4 ones you can find also on the topDNS website. They've been handling how to reduce abuse through quality, presented by Brian Symbolic and Theo Goetz, covering the QPI program of PIR. The second one was about standards and frameworks for evidencing abuse online, presented by Jeff Betzer from Clean DNS. The third one was about how to investigate online abuse with free tools, presented by Theo Goetz from Real-Time Register. And the fourth one was about recognizing good practices in the DNS towards positive and data-driven policy discussions, presented by Emily and Lucien Taylor from the DNS Research Federation. The next webinar you can already mark in your calendar is in December, Tuesday, the 12th of December. It will be part 6 about addressing and evidencing and mitigating abuse in Web3. This will be presented by Freename and Clean DNS. And you can follow the link in the chat to register for that one. And with this, I would like to hand over to Rowena to present the Compass dashboards. And thank you, Rowena, for being with us today.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Lars. It's really great to be here talking to you about our Compass project. So I'm Rowena Schoo from the DNS Abuse Institute, where I am Director of Policy and Programs. I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about what the Institute is, in case you haven't heard of us. I'll then go into our Compass project in terms of what we do, how we do it, and why. I'll speak a little bit about some of the challenges, and then I'll give you an overview of the various outputs we have available. And that falls into kind of 2 camps. There's the things that we put out publicly that everyone can see on our website. And then there's the things that we give to registrars and registries privately for them to get an understanding of what's going on in the domains that they manage. And those are our dashboards. And then finally, some time for Q&A if there are questions at the end. So the DNS Abuse Institute was created in about 2021. We were created by and we are funded by a public interest registry who run the .org top-level domain name. And we were created in pursuit of their public purpose mission. So PIR is a charity in the US, and so the money that they make running the .org top level gets reinvested into things that are in the good of the internet. So when we talk about DNS abuse at the Institute, we use this definition on the screen, which is basically technical abuse. So phishing, farming, malware, botnets, and spam, when it's a delivery mechanism for the other types of harm. The work that we do covers all TLDs and also all registrars. It's not just focused on the .org, and in fact, I don't look at any internal .org issues in terms of abuse. Our focus is really outwards at the entire industry and engaging with stakeholders more broadly. Everything that we do is free. Sometimes I forget to say that, so I like to make sure it's on the slide. So we're not pitching for money, we're not trying to sell anything. Everything that we offer and everything I talk about today is available for you to get for free. And we also have a multi-stakeholder advisory council that helps us with the strategic direction of the Institute. So one of our main projects is called Compass, and when we were setting up the Institute, we had this mission to reduce DNS abuse. And the challenge that we faced is that there wasn't really good, reliable, granular information about how much DNS abuse there was, where it was concentrated, whether or not it was being mitigated. We felt like we really needed that understanding to be able to inform the Institute's activities and our mission. But if we were going to do it for ourselves, then why not make that available to the wider community and use that to empower the DNS community? So we set about creating a project that would do just that. We wanted it to be sufficiently granular down to the registrar and registry level, not just the overall picture. And we wanted it to be something that allowed for comparisons over time and between different operators. The information that we get out of Compass also informs our efforts to develop best practices, and ultimately the overarching aim is to reduce abuse at the DNS level. So we set some principles for the project. Those are transparency, credibility and independence, accuracy and reliability. So we wanted this to be something that people could really understand how we were getting to those numbers. We didn't want just domains on a list without any evidence. So it was important to us to create a public methodology that's linked in this slide, and also you can see a bit of a screenshot of that on the screen. It's quite a long document, but it goes into all the details of how we get to the numbers that we get to. To make sure that we had a level of independence and also some academic rigor to the project, we contracted an external party, which is Core Labs, which is led by Maciej Kozinski out of the Grenoble University in France. And so we basically went to Maciej and asked him to develop the best possible way to measure DNS abuse. DNS abuse being that definition I had mentioned earlier. And the result of some of these principles, which is important to mention, is that our Compass project is optimized for accuracy rather than coverage of all harm. So we're not trying to measure all of the harm on the internet. We're measuring a very specific subset, and we're doing that in a way that we believe is as reliable as possible to allow for those comparisons. And I'll go into more detail. So what exactly do we measure? If you think of all the harm that exists online, all of the bad stuff that's happening, there's only a proportion of that actually gets detected, identified, and reported anywhere. So immediately we're kind of zooming in a little bit. Sometimes this is called the iceberg principle, because there's always an amount of harm that we just don't know is happening, we're not aware of. In terms of Compass, our focus is then narrower again in terms of looking at just DNS abuse. And then for this project, we once again narrowed it down even further, and we're focusing on phishing and malware. And that's because those were the types of DNS abuse that we felt could be the most reliably evidenced at this point in time. So in terms of our reports and the things we put out into the world, that means we're looking at an observation of phishing and malware across the ecosystem, whether or not mitigation has occurred, how quickly it's happened. That stat in particular is one that sits with registrars. And we also get an understanding of the type of registration, whether it's compromised or malicious. So a malicious domain is one that is being registered for the purpose of phishing or malware, and a compromised one is a benign domain that has been compromised for bad things to occur, and that can happen at the website hosting or DNS level. Most commonly, we see that around the website level. If someone has registered a domain name, it's got a vulnerability, perhaps in the WordPress or content management system, and then a bad actor has come along and compromised that. And that's important because it matters for what mitigation happens. It's typically less appropriate to act on compromised domain names at the DNS level because of the risk of collateral damage associated with turning the domain off. So this is a bit of a busy slide, but it's meant to be a visual representation of the methodology that I mentioned earlier. So if you want to dig into the details, you can look into the methodology, but at a high level, what happens is that we start by taking an input, which are reputation block lists, sometimes called RBLs. We use 4 of those, so APWG, Fish Tank, OpenFish, and URL House. Those RBLs they're generally not created for mitigation at the DNS level. The RBLs tend to be created for network blocking. And so from that starting point, we need to do quite a lot of work to clean that list and narrow it down to a level that is appropriate for measuring abuse at the DNS level. So that means, firstly, deduplicating. So we measure at the unique domain level, not the URL level. It's really quite common that in some of these lists, you can see 70,000 plus URLs using the same domain name. And that's because some types of attacks generate a new URL anytime someone visits that website, whether or not that's a computer or a bot, a computer or a person. So immediately we need to trim that down to domain names because that's our focus. Secondly, we go through a process of removing types of domain names where it would be typically inappropriate to act at the DNS level. So for example, we remove what we call special domain names. That includes things like URL shorteners, like bit.ly.com, subdomain providers, where they are known to us, for example, duckDNS, and also file sharing services, such as docs.google.com. We also publish this publicly, and it's also something that you can help us update. We certainly appeal to the research community to help us keep that list up to date because it's a lot of manual work. So once we've done all this cleaning and narrowed that list down, there's a process of analysis that includes taking a sort of fingerprint of the site. That means recording the DNS records, the content, the screenshots. We then, or Core Labs then has a process for determining whether the domain name has been registered maliciously or whether it has been compromised. And then they go back and visit that domain name at consistent intervals. So starting with minutes, 5, 15, 30, then hours, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, out to 12 hours. And then that goes on for a period of 30 days. And at that point, we stop measuring. So that checking and measuring is when we're looking for whether any mitigation action has occurred to prevent the harm from continuing. Sometimes it might be that mitigation happens, but it happens after the 30 days and we don't see it. Finally, all of that information is summarized into our outputs, and that falls into three main categories. We have interactive charts, which are available on our website, PDF reports that are available on our website, and then we have the dashboards, which are available for the registry and registrars to look at for their own data. So I should mention that there are some challenges in terms of measuring abuse. It's not a very easy thing to do. All efforts to measure abuse are going to be a best effort. The input isn't perfect. False positives exist. That's just a fact. We do our best to minimize them, but there are challenges there. Sometimes we see phishing simulations, and sometimes we see kind of gray areas where it's not quite enough evidence to say, yes, this is abuse, but there seems to be something going on. And I've written a blog on that recently, which I've included in the links for follow-up. In terms of presenting this data, it's never really a normal distribution, even if you're looking at domain names across the industry. Often the data is really skewed. So, for example, when we were looking at how to report at the registry and registrar level, sometimes we see a case of a registry that has zero abuse, and then 1 month they'll have like several hundred phishing cases, all malicious, all mitigated. And that makes it a little bit challenging for us to think about how to present that data, because that big chunk, if it's a really small registry, can really quickly shoot that registry to the top of the list as being the highest amount of abuse per 100,000 domains under management, when actually it's really just that they've had one bad month, and one bad month doesn't make a bad registry or a bad registrar. So we've had to be really thoughtful in terms of how we present this information. It's a real challenge in terms of small numbers that makes the skewed data more complicated. We think there probably is a bit of a geographical bias in some of these lists, potentially with English being the most common target language. And finally, ccTLDs remain to be a bit of a challenge for us as well in terms of getting data. So with all that in mind, I'm going to take you through our public reporting, which mirrors our dashboards. And then I'll go on to the dashboards that we have available and the types of information you can see and how you can get access. So this data is all available on our website publicly. We have these charts presented, and you can actually also toggle between different parts. So they are interactive. You can zoom in on phishing, you can look at malware. You can see this trend since we started publishing data. So we started putting out reports about just over a year ago. So we've got a bit over 12 months of data now showing. On the left, you're seeing phishing and malware. The phishing is in orange and the malware is in blue. On the right, you're seeing how much of that we believe has been mitigated. So mitigated is the green section there. Orange is not mitigated. And then there's a small yellow part, which is called uncategorized. And that means we weren't able to determine either way whether mitigation had occurred. That portion has been getting smaller over time as the accuracy of that work has improved. The other charts we have available are looking at, firstly, whether or not the domain has been maliciously registered or compromised. This is an example of the way that you can toggle the chart on our website. So the top chart is showing malware on the left, and the bottom chart is showing phishing. So the blue portion is maliciously registered, and then the purple is compromised. And we do tend to see that that's different between phishing and malware. And so we see more compromised phishing, and we see more malicious phishing, and we see more compromise in malware. We think that's because phishing relies more heavily on deception in the actual domain name. So it's more important what the domain name is if you're trying to phish someone. On the right, we also have an understanding of the speed of mitigation. So the rest of our charts are showing a count of unique domain names, but this one is actually showing a count of registrars, and it's grouping them by their median mitigation time. So on the website, you can select a single month and get that breakdown at the bottom, and that's showing you chunks of time. The first chunk is less than 24 hours, and the next one is 24 to 48, up to 7 days, and then more than 7 days. So the final aspect of our public reporting is the specific reporting, which we've added to the PDF reports. So that is a screenshot of our website. We have this index of all of the PDF reports that we've put out. We do one every month at the same time that we update the charts. And in there, we've always had the aggregate reporting, which is what I've just been taking you through. But since June, we've started adding what we're calling specific reporting. So this is where registrars and registries are listed in 4 different metrics, and the metrics are about abuse per 100,000 domains under management, whether it's high or low compared to their peers. And for the registrars, there's also one on new registrations and how much abuse per new creates is coming through the door. So the idea is that the abuse per 100,000 domains under management is giving you a sense of your existing stock, and per new creates is giving you a sense of what comes through the door. Our specific reporting is only focusing on malicious registrations, so we have excluded compromise from that, so just bear that in mind when you're reading it. We've also made a number of other exclusions which are explained in the report, but it's things like having a minimum amount of abuse per month to be able to get into the table. And the reason for that is to try to reduce the chance of a false positive skewing the situation. So you need like 5 abuse reports at least to be able to get into a table. If you don't reach that threshold, you'll be listed in an appendix, and the appendixes are linked in the PDF report and published on our website as well. So finally, the dashboard. So once you see everything out publicly that we've released, you might be thinking, well, it would be great to know what this information means for me. If I'm not listed, how am I doing? Am I close to being in one of these tables? How do I compare to my peers? And that's why we've created the dashboards, to give you access to this information. I kind of just said that. Another way that this is really useful is if you are making changes to your policies or your practices and you implement something new, it's quite helpful to see over time whether you see a reflection of that in the Compass data. We've really tried to present this to you as a independent, academically rigorous metric that you can use to monitor whether changes are having an impact and how that compares to peers as well. And of course, it's all free. So this is an example of what the dashboards look like. Thank you to PIR for allowing us to show the .org dashboard. So if you would like to access your own dashboard, you will eventually get a login, and once you log in, you'll be presented with a screen that starts looking like this. You'll have the option to toggle between months. This one at the moment, the information at the top is showing August. At the very top, you'll get some information about the registrations overall that we've observed for your TLD or registrar, starting with your domains under management, and then below that, your newly registered domains for that month. If you're a registrar, this data will only be focusing on GTLD registrations. And the reason for that is the difficulties I mentioned about getting information in the ccTLD space and connecting the registrar to the domain name. And so we've made it the intention is to make it the same for all registrars. So we've narrowed it to GTLDs. So that's the high level data about what's going on in the zone. Below that is where we have observed abuse. So firstly, we'll tell you how many unique domain names have been observed as abusive this month. And so that's looking at phishing and malware. So in .org this month, that was 459. We'll then give you that same metric, but calculated in an observed abuse per 100,000 domains under management. So this is an attempt to normalize that for different sizes of registries and registrars. And then finally, we'll give you this as a percentage of new registrations to understand what's coming in the door. That figure there is looking at both compromised and malicious. But if you look at the chart down to the right of this screen, that's where we've isolated for just malicious. The thinking there is that compromised tends to not be necessarily visible as it comes through the door because it's a benign domain name. It's a normal legitimate registration, and then it becomes compromised later on down the line. So it's basically impossible to tell when it comes into your domains under management because it is in fact a legitimate registration. On the top right, these other figures were based on us thinking about the fact that sometimes we hear that registries and registrars just can't do anything about abuse. Abuse just happens. And we thought, well, if that's true, then you would expect the amount of abuse to be in line with the amount of domains under management for any given registrar or registry. And what we see is that that isn't typically the case. So what we have done with this figure is take the top one is looking at observed proportion of all registered domain names. So that's for all the registered domain names we can see. How many of them, in this case, are .orgs? That figure below is the same, but for new registrations. And then below that again, we do the same thing for abuse. So for all the abuse we've observed in this month, how much of it is sitting with .org? So the idea is if your proportion of all registered domain names, when you compare that with your proportion of abuse, if the abuse proportion is lower, then it looks like you're under indexing on abuse compared to your size. If the proportion of abuse is higher, then the thinking is that you might be over indexing on abuse compared to the domain names that you hold under management. So as you scroll down the dashboard, actually just on the chart on the left, so that's just giving you the abuse per 100,000 domains under management over time. And then you also have the option to toggle between malicious or compromised or both of them together. So if you're comparing it to our reports, you'll need to toggle to malicious to be able to get a comparable figure to those tables that I mentioned earlier. So as you scroll down the dashboard, you'll get more information about the type of abuse within your domains under management. So this is the same as the public reporting. Orange is phishing, blue is malware. This trend is pretty similar to what we see overall. The malware tends to go up and down quite a bit, and there tends to be more phishing than malware. Then on the right, we'll show you mitigation rates for your zone. And again, you can toggle between malicious and compromised, malicious or compromised. Then below this, we give you a sense of whether or not the phishing that we see for you and the malware that we see for you is compromised or malicious. So phishing is on the left, malware on the right, and the same coloring as our public charts, with compromised being in purple and malicious in blue. Finally, there'll be a section below this which attempts to give you a peer comparison So defining peer groups has been challenging. And at the moment, we've chosen to do this just by the size of your domains under management. So when you log in, whether you're a registrar or a TLD, you'll be presented with a peer group that gives you 10 peers above and 10 peers below, just based on your domains under management. So in this case, they might be gTLDs or they might also be ccTLDs, but they're just based on similar sizes. This might change month to month, so you're not necessarily comparing against the exact same peer group. We have chosen to redact the other TLDs or registrars that are listed next to you. We've had a lot of interesting discussions with people about this, where people feel that actually there's quite a lot of value in being able to see who you compare to. So that's something that we might consider in the future. But for the moment, we wanted to give people the opportunity to be able to download this information and share it with people if they wanted to. So often registries and registrars get asked by external parties, governments, regulators, civil service about their abuse performance. And the fact that we have redacted these other than your own data means that you are now empowered to share that or to publish it if you want to. And then finally, we give you a sense of how you compare to peers in terms of the type of registration and also mitigation. So again, you can't see exactly who they are, but you can get a sense of how your breakdown compares to others of a similar size. So in summary, if you're looking to understand phishing and malware across the entire ecosystem, you can do that by visiting our public reporting. You can see the PDF reports every month, and you can interact with our charts. We are generally working our way towards putting more information into these. For example, I'd like to include mitigation rates into those tables you saw before. So it's not just abuse per 100,000 domains under management, but we're also giving a sense of whether or not that abuse has been mitigated. So we're always thinking through how we can put more information out into the public domain. And we're really happy to receive feedback on that as well if you're interested in seeing certain things, certain metrics. If you would like to access your own dashboard, we have a support email that you can contact. Please only request information for registrars or registries that you actually have an affiliation with. To be clear, it might be fun to see .coms, but unless you're VeriSign, please don't request it or we won't give it to you. So once you contact them, you'll get a form to fill out where you just need to accept the terms and conditions of using our service. It's all free, it's all available for you to use. Once you have filled that out, it'll just take us a few days to update the access on Tableau, and then you'll be asked to create a login through Tableau, and you'll be able to get on there and see that information anytime you like and use that to help guide your internal decision making as you're thinking about how you manage abuse. As always, we're really happy to receive feedback. This is version 1 of our dashboards that we've put out into the public domain. So we're looking at how do we improve this? How do we make it better? If you have ideas or things that you'd like to see, really happy to hear those. One of the things on my to-do list is to give better explanatory notes. So when you go in, you'll see more tooltips and information explaining what I've walked you through today. And that's it. We have a bit of time for questions, so I'm very happy to take those now.
So thank you. First of all, thank you very much, Rowena, for providing the update on the Compass project of the DNS Abuse Institute. I have one first question in the questions part, but I'm not 100% sure if you're the right person to ask this question, but let's give it a try. So there's Igor from ISOC Armenia, and he's having the question: the Armenian Internet Registry receives weekly hundreds of phishing emails. We were sending them to phishingreport@uscert.gov. However, we never received any feedback and stopped sending. What will you advise us to do?
So we have another project at the Institute called NetBeacon, which is all about reporting abuse. So NetBeacon, we created to address two problems. One is that it's really difficult to know where to report abuse to. It's quite complicated to do it at internet scale. You have to sort of figure out where to go to make those reports. And then two, when you're receiving those reports as a registrar, they tend to be quite difficult. You get a lot of reports that aren't for you, they're duplicative. You don't necessarily have all the evidence that you need. Thanks for putting that in the chat, Lars. So we created NetBeacon as an intermediary to sort of sit in between reporters and registrars. So what we've tried to do with that is standardize the evidence that's required and also enrich that report as it goes through our system. So it doesn't guarantee that there will be action taken, but it gives you a really good guide as to what type of evidence you need to include to make your report most likely to be actioned. And it will address it to the registrar directly to be assessed. I probably can't speak to those specific cases, but happy to give more guidance on the types of reports or how to make them most useful as you send them through.
Okay, thank you very much. There's another question from Nathan in the chat. Is there a system or software that is made to work as a notification and tells the type of DNS abuse? I think that is partially covered by NetBeacon, a tool that tells you what type of abuse you have at hand. I think this is something that's not covered by NetBeacon, but it's.
So you mean, is it phishing? Is it malware? What is going on? Yeah, so we do give some guidance on our website for NetBeacon as to what is like a description of each of those things in terms of phishing, malware, botnet, spam, which should be a really good starting point trying to get through that. I don't know if there's a specific software that will do that for you, perhaps.
No, thank you very much. I think so, Nathan. If your question is not fully answered, please feel free to add a follow-up question to the question spot or raise your hand. One question from my end: what have been the feedback and the reactions from the registries and registrars that you have talked to so far?
Yeah, thanks, Lars. So I think overwhelmingly positive about being able to have access to this data. This is something that we consistently hear people say, like, I don't have this information for my own registry or registrar. I definitely don't have it to compare with peers. So people are really generally incredibly grateful to have some way of tracking how much abuse they have and whether what they're doing is working. I mean, if you're a responsible registry or registrar, you spend time and energy trying to keep your zone safe and secure. And so it's really nice to know whether you're on the right track or not. So the feedback that we've had is that has been really, really welcomed. We are seeing people think about how they can even use it to incorporate into understanding how well teams are performing internally. Some people are using it as a KPI. Some people, even if their dashboard doesn't necessarily say that they're doing great, they really have welcomed that, the ones that have spoken to me at least, because they say, I can take this internally and make the case for why we need more people working on abuse or why we need to change things. And they just haven't had that information available up until now. A lot of the information that is produced publicly isn't directed at the registry and registrar level. it's more aimed at network protection in terms of the block list. So having this in a way that helps you understand phishing and malware at the DNS level and whether mitigation is appropriate or not is really quite unique.
Thank you. We have another question from Karen Rose from Inter-Isle. I have a question about how the project is defining mitigation. By mitigation, do you mean action or taking down the domain after it has been reported for phishing activity, or taking actions to prevent malicious registrations before they can be used?
So it's afterwards. So it means once it's been identified, has action been taken to stop the harm? Has the harm stopped? The challenge that we have with mitigation is that it's not attributed to any particular actor. So it's not necessarily clear that whether it's the registrar, the registry, the registrant that's taken action, or indeed the hosting provider, or it could be that the bad guy just got what he wanted and then turned the domain off.
Thank you. We have another follow-up question from Igor from Armenia. What punishment measures can be taken against phishers?
Oh, interesting. So it sort of depends on what jurisdiction the person is located in and how much evidence there is. So I'm based in the UK, and here there is like a pretty big overlap with phishing and fraud. So if there was evidence that phishing was happening, you're impersonating someone for personal gain, that is likely to be something that could potentially be prosecuted as fraud in the UK. I think the challenge that law enforcement have is sort of tracking these people down across different jurisdictions. There might be other legislation in other countries that could also capture this. A lot of countries have sort of computer misuse offences and things like that. I assume that's what you mean by punishment. The other punishment, I suppose, is that we suspend their domain name and they're not allowed the domain name anymore.
Thank you for taking that question. I think you perfectly answered it to the extent possible. I don't see any further questions on the questions part, and I don't see any other hands raised. So please take the opportunity to ask questions right here, right now. Oh, so Karen, you would like to ask a follow-up question? Okay. My mitigation to mitigation. Are you saying then that's the date the domain no longer appears in the zone?
It's not quite that. It's more that when the analysis happens, core labs take a kind of like a fingerprint of, I think I had it on my slide, of a bunch of different information at that time. And then they go back and check whether anything has changed. So it slightly varies as to whether the domain is compromised or malicious. So if it's compromised, they will accept changes to the content as indicating that mitigation has happened, even if the domain is still active. But if it is malicious, then you're more looking for things like server hold or suspension. There's a bit more detail about that in our methodology as well, if you'd like to dig into that a little bit further.
Okay, there's a thanks from Karen. So
I'm also happy to chat about it too.
Yeah, so thank you very much. Okay. I don't see any further questions or hands raised. So Rowena, thank you for providing the update. There's another thank you from Clean DNS on your presentation, and I can only echo this. So thank you very much for providing an update on your work on the the Compass project and the dashboards that you provide. I think it's great work, not only for raising awareness on abuse in the general public, but also on the individual level when you talk to registries and registrars. I think this is great work and much appreciated and something that needs to be supported. So thank you very much for your update, and you're always welcome to future updates on your work here at the Best Practice webinar series. And I hope that this webinar was also helpful for you as a participant in the audience. And again, please take the opportunity to provide feedback via the survey that will be shown right after the webinar when you close the window. And please also take the opportunity to register for the next topDNS Best Practice webinar on the 12th of December. So again, Rowena, thank you for taking the time. Thank you for the update. And we are not at the top of the hour, so we will give back a few more minutes to those who participated. And I hope you have a great afternoon or evening. And with this, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lars. Thanks for having me. And thanks for joining, everyone.
Thank you.